everybody. This is Holly and Kat, and we are here. This is our first edition of Spooky Stories by the Sisters Grimm. So we both love stories about everything to do with paranormal, and we have decided that it would be super fun to include you guys in our conversations about spooky stuff, because I think you guys like what we like, and hopefully you will enjoy this. So we are both vampire enthusiasts, I will say. Does that sound right, Kat? Is
That
that a good?
sounds right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we've talked about shows that we watch and stuff that we like and movies that we like and all that good stuff. But in doing so, we've done a little research to find out some of the history of vampires. And we came up with some information that's insane, you guys. Okay, so you know a century is 100 years, right? So think about that. 100 years. Okay. 630 centuries of vampire stories. There's something there. That old expression about in every fable is an ounce of truth makes me wonder, things that make me go, So one of the oldest stories Kat's going to share with us, and it goes all the way back to Egypt. And Kat is a big fan of Egypt, as am I. We love our history. But Kat is such a devoted person that she's actually got tattoos. So I'm envious. I have tattoo envy. I'm just going to say that right now. But if you would, Kat, tell us about the first vampire story out of Egypt that we can share tonight.
Well, this one is from the 2700 BCE, and it reads, the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet is considered the first vampiric figure. She was sent by her father, the sun god Ra, to devour the followers of Apophis, the spirit of evil. But she developed a bloodthirst so great, Ra had to appease her by sedating her with beer that he had dyed red. Now, this is the first time that I've ever heard of Sekhmet being a vampiric creature.
See, that's what really got me too, because there's all these different stories and there's legends and information about cultural things to do with day-to-day life and what they ate, what they did for work, what they wore. I studied Egyptian history back where I was a child. There was a Rosicrucian museum, and I was absolutely fascinated with little things as small as how they curled their hair. So back in the day, they would use sticks. They would roll their hair up and then cake it with wet mud, let it dry, knock the dirt out, and there was their curls.
That's cool. I didn't
We
know
know now, So we know now that water actually is the caveat for making hair change and curl, but I digress. This whole thing about someone drinking blood that long ago, that's interesting to me. And the fact that it's described, see, now Ra was such a prominent figure in Egyptian deities that the idea that he had to deal with this situation directly also fascinates me, because if he had to deal with this must have been not a small problem. This had to have been a significant issue. If the priests of the temple and the priestesses could not deal with her issue and he had to actually directly address it, that tells me that a lot was happening back then. So if anyone else has more information on this, I would love to hear it. So one of the next stories that we came across was from 700 BC. And this, we talked about another story, and Kat has a wonderful story to share with this, but I'm going to just go over the basics on here. Lamia was a queen in ancient Greece mythology whose children were stolen from her. Awful. Mad with grief, she devoured other children in revenge. Gross. Wow, but okay, I understand. Other stories tell of her luring men to her bed and then drinking their blood. So I've been mad and upset and pissed off, but I've never once thought of eating people to devour and fill a hole in my life. So this is fascinating to me as well. Sure, she was full of grief, and she missed her kids, but why would you attack other children? That's awful. I know it's human nature to do that in some form, but that seems way extreme to me. Actually harming another child as a mom is not instinctive.
No, I'm thinking, as a mom myself, if something happened to my kids, I don't think I would go and seek revenge on other children.
No, that's
I
not
would want to
normal.
protect them. That, it's the
Right.
mother instinct.
We do that all the time. We're instinctively wanting to look out for children, and even animals do that. They're protective of younger children.
Mhm.
Um, but what's fascinating to me is that if she got into this blood rage and had some kind of health issue, maybe, I'm guessing, that she was craving blood, as some people do, maybe that makes sense.
Maybe
Um,
it was low iron and, you
who
couldn't
knows?
just eat meat.
Right. But you had an interesting story to share about the lamia. So talk about that for a second, because I forgot about this story. So for anyone that's ever watched the Supernatural series, so many great stories in that series, gobs.
Oh,
But she
yeah.
remembered one that I had forgotten. So share that with me, please, if you would.
So, I don't know how many times I've been binge watched Supernatural. I just love the show. My daughter loves it too. Anyways, so there was an episode where Bobby Singer had a demon in his basement, and he's trying to get information about Crowley.
Mhm.
And Rufus, another hunter, contacted him and told him that he was chasing a lamia, and he's in the States. And Bobby says, no one's seen a lamia outside of Greece. He's like, yeah, I know. So he's like, why are all these monsters being found in places that they're not supposed to be seen?
Right.
So his neighbor is trying, I can't remember her name, she's a blonde, is trying to get Bobby to go over to her house, and says that her wood chipper is not working. Can you come take a look at it? And he's like, yeah, sure. We'll do dinner, blah, blah, blah. So then Rufus calls Bobby to find out, how do you kill a lamia. So he told him you need a certain dagger blessed by so many priests. I can't remember exactly what the thing is. So he goes, well, what was the last thing this lamia was eating? And Rufus says blondes, and he's like, oh no. So he busts into his neighbor's house,
Right.
and he says, where's the bedroom? And she's like, upstairs. So he runs into the bedroom. He's got a shotgun with him, I think.
Mhm.
Anyway, and he's looking around, and the neighbor thinks he's crazy, right? And then she kind of looks up to the ceiling, and she's like pointing, and he looks up, and he finds a lamia up on the ceiling, and she goes to jump down and attack his neighbor, but the Lamia and Bobby get thrown out the window. Long story short, he puts her in the wood chipper, and there's blood everywhere. Cakes his neighbor, and he's like, I thought you said the wood chipper didn't work. And she's like, well, I just said that to get you over here. So when he told Rufus that he killed it, he goes, oh, you happen to have one of those daggers blessed by however? He goes, no, wood chipper. He goes, that'll work too. um,
That's
it's just funny.
crazy. That is wild. That is wild. So here's another story that's very old about vampires from the year 1037. In Indian folklore, Vitalis, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, are spirits who inhabit the bodies of the dead and then feed on the blood of the living, which prevents the corpse from decomposing. And I'm going to jump ahead for a second, because we were talking about somebody else that used blood to keep from decomposing while they were alive. And it's a blood countess, Elizabeth Bathory. I'm totally
Bathory?
Bathory, thank you. Or Bothry, there's a hyphen over the A. Did
Ah,
Elizabeth didn't drink the blood, but she liked to bathe in it and was thought to be responsible for the death of over 600 virgin girls.
that's a
Well,
lot of girls.
that's not vampires exactly, but that's an incredible philosophy to think that. And I've heard stories about placentas being incredibly healthy for people, but just human blood. I mean, so here's another fascination story with human blood, and it's in depth. I mean, that's really a devoted belief. I mean, I've heard of people washing their pigs in milk right before fair to make their skin brighter and more supple, but human blood would do that? I don't know. I don't know. I don't really want to find out.
It kind of reminds me, it just makes me think that even today, uh, I don't know if it's still practiced, but hunters, if they happen to kill a deer, for example, they would take the deer's heart, and they would eat it raw, so they could have strength and intelligence and everything, of like components of the deer, and
Right.
prolong their life as well. So it's an interesting thing about how blood is the life. Like it's been
Well,
said for so many centuries.
well, and to honor an animal that you've taken the life of, there's several things in many cultures that are expected of you. And
Yep.
one of them is to wear the blood on your
Yep.
forehead, to drink some of the blood in honor of the animal, and that you're thanking them for their sacrifice because they're feeding you.
Yep.
They're feeding you. And so they gave themselves in a very honorable fashion, if that's what it's for. Definitely not the trophy version of hunting. But I just love that these things are kind of a thread in these centuries. That's a lot of time to have all these other stories. And there's many more. So here's another one, circa 1460. Prince Vlad III of Wallachia, now part of Romania, better known as the bloodthirsty Vlad the Impaler, was the inspiration for Count Dracula. So the stories on that have been so diverse, and there's been legends that he had a bloodthirst. There's been legends that Vlad, had a sickness and was iron deficient. There's been stories that he just literally went mad. And the stories of him being Vlad the Impaler were not limited. So I'm fairly confident that his brutality was documented well in history. Don't you think, Kat?
Yeah. And who knows, he might have been in hemophilia as well. Or hemophiliac.
Right.
Anyways, he might have had hemophilia.
Right.
And I know someone who is a direct descendant of Vlad the Impaler.
Do you really?
She's actually in the paranormal world.
Oh, I love that.
Can I mention her name?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, it's Danielle Diva.
Okay.
She's been on Spaced Out Radio. She's been on my show. She's been on a lot of podcasts. She's very well known, and she's supposed to be writing a book of her ancestry right now. So I told her when it's done, I definitely want to purchase that book. So she refers to him as her uncle.
Uncle Vlad.
Uncle Vlad, yeah.
I love that. That's crazy. Okay, there's a couple more. Let's hear these, okay? From the year 1500, by shoving a brick into the corpse's mouth, Italians hoped to prevent them from leaving their coffins to prey on the living. In 2006, archaeologists uncovered a skull with a brick in its mouth, reported by NBC. There's lots of stories with cages over a dead body, with swords in a body.
Being buried face down.
There's so many all through Europe. Now, our country in the United States is not old enough to really connect with these storylines, but Europe is rich with stories of centuries and centuries going forward from time beginning, that there were people that were feared and believed to be of a vampire nature, of a vampire type, that they would attack the living, somehow connected with death themselves, but not being totally dead, which I also think is a fascinating connection. Mm-hmm. And for all of these stories to come forward, and now granted, we know now that some of these things could easily have been medical conditions, that someone was craving iron in the blood or whatever. Yep. So that explains some of it, clearly. But what would put someone beyond that if it's not, let's take out the science, if it's not somebody that's got an actual health issue that they require blood in some way to ingest it to survive, they just crave it? Was there an illness that made people like vampires that we no longer have? Mm-hmm. Or that we've almost eradicated with modern medicine? I've wondered that, because there's enough people that are fascinated with vampires. There's people that donate their blood willingly to vampires. I've seen many times on television. And it's done in a very respectful and courteous manner. It's not done in a creepy way, which, excuse me, for some of us, the whole idea sounds creepy, but everybody's different. I don't know what the circumstances are, and I will not judge. I definitely find it fascinating. It's not something I personally feel the need to partake in. But I do feel like there's gotta be a thread there of truth in all of this. This is too long, you guys. What other stories do we have that are this old?
Yeah.
Seriously. 630 centuries. Really? That
That's a
long?
long time.
Come on. There's got to be something to that. I don't know what it is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something. It's something. I think it's fascinating personally.
Two things. Also, over in Europe, they found corpses where their canines were pulled out because they feared that they were vampires and they didn't want them to be able to go and feast on people. So that used to happen as well. But apparently, there are clubs, and there are some in the big cities, even here in Canada,
Mhm.
Toronto. It's vampire clubs where people will go and supposedly drink human blood. They have people there that volunteer and say, "Drink my blood." Now, I don't know how they do it. I've never been to one of those clubs.
Right.
I've never knowingly known anyone who's been there, but
Right.
it would be fascinating to research. I don't know if I'd want to go to that club, but it would be fascinating to hear someone who's been to those clubs, any members, to talk to us about why do they do this.
Well, and let's just put it out there for right now. So anybody listening or watching, if you have participated in this sort of thing, we would love to hear your side of the story. We really
Absolutely.
would. Um, we're fans of the legends and we're fans of the history of the legends, and I would love to know what you do and why you do it. I'm fascinated with that as well. As much as it's part of your life, it's part of my life in my own way, and I would love to know more about it. I'm curious and open, so no judgment here. We just want to hear what you think, and if you want to be anonymous, that's cool too. But we'd love to hear what your side of the story is on this subject matter. Um,
As I mentioned, I don't want to partake in
yeah, no,
these rituals, but it does fascinate me, and I'd like to know more.
right. So there's another one that's really interesting from the 1720s, and that wasn't that long ago. The story of Sava Savanovich, who killed and drank the blood of peasants who came to his mill, is considered the first Serbian vampire. His story eventually spread across Europe, influencing centuries of bloody tales. Locals believe he still lurks in the small town of Zoraj, and I'm not pronouncing this correct, I guess, Zorazje. So if someone can correct me on the pronunciation, I'd love that. And then, of course, we have Bram Stoker's vampire Dracula story from 1897. So in the 1800s, they were talking about vampires and Dracula. Um, Centuries and centuries of stories obviously materialized into some kind of literary fiction. Um, but what about all these legends? What about all these stories? You know,
There's
I
always a hint of truth to these stories. So,
I feel
um,
like there must be somewhere. I don't know where it is. I
yeah.
wish I did, but I do find it fascinating.
Oh, yeah. So do I. Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about the Diary of a Vampire stories. And the part of that that I enjoyed very much was for the first time I felt like there was a vampire voice that was different. I felt
Mhm.
like instead of just being a monster, it showed the possibility of a vampire having a long life, and how did they have a family unit, and how did they function, how did they support themselves, all those unusual but normal questions you would ask a person in life. How do you survive? How do you
Mhm.
do what you do? I just love the angle of that story, and I feel like that was a clever way to breathe life, as it were, into a story that was very old and legend, and make it more plausible for daily consumption to understand and think about. Um, it's just fascinating to me. And then, so there's one here also from 1922, and I can't say that word, Kat, so please do this for me.
Nosferatu.
Okay, the silent film of that word, which is based inexplicably to avoid copyright issues on Stoker's book, establishes the conventions of vampire and horror films.
We had met,
1922, when one of the first movies out of, and it had to do with vampires. That's
yeah,
fascinating.
it's wild. And we had mentioned earlier that, or I mentioned to you that they're going to be remaking Nosferatu. And I don't
Mhm.
know if it's coming out this year or next year. Um, I want to say it's coming out at Christmas time of all times.
That's
But I
great.
can't remember if that's the movie or if I'm thinking of something else. But I
Right.
definitely will be seeing it
Right.
because I'm sorry, my dog wants out. Maybe not. um, yeah, I've only seen clips of the original Nosferatu, black and white, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
Very,
Yeah.
very fascinating. It's just, especially when the sunlight comes to him, and just the cinematography was amazing for
Yeah.
1922. At least I find it was.
It was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if you enjoyed stories like this and you would like to know more about this, please contact us. Um, this is Holly Jordan,
I'm Kat Ward.
and we are doing spooky stories by the Sisters Grimm. This is our new fun thing we're doing. We'll talk to you again soon. We've got lots more fun stories coming, and we'd love to hear your ideas and comments. Thanks for stopping by and listening or watching.
Take care.